Like I was saying yesterday, today I wanted to talk about stories in games, specifically if a story can be good enough to forgive some of the game's shortcomings, or I guess, what's another way of putting it? Mask some of the repetitive nature that's just inherent in games. I mean, mind you, if you boil any game down, you will get to a point where you can just see the mechanics of go here, do this, take this, put it in this, make that, wash, rinse, repeat. You know what I mean? Like the general process, the game mechanics, they're repetitive by nature, but I mean, what they say, art mirrors life. Life's very repetitive in that way. So to harp on a game for that alone isn't really fair. But when that's so apparent that it begins to really bog down the experience, then it becomes an issue. I guess what I'm saying is, and maybe you agree, maybe you don't. For me, a good game is one that, okay, set aside the idea that a game will be repetitive if you break it down to its core anyway. A good game masks that in such a way that you don't notice or feel the monotony of the repetitive nature of the game's mechanics. Now, sometimes there's so much you can do, even if it is generally the same thing, that you don't notice. For example, I reference games like Fallout and Elder Scrolls a lot because there is so much to do. Now, mind you, you can easily get sidetracked by side quests, and they're more or less all the same to an extent. But there's so much content, environment, lore, characters, conversations, that sort of thing, that you kind of forget and maybe even forgive the fact that you are basically just going from point A to point B, fetch this, bring it back, done. That's it. But the game that I actually wanted to highlight, it's one of my favorites, and I thought about it, and it is very repetitive, is The Last of Us. One of my favorite games. Not funny. I can't put it as high as Red Dead Redemption because just Red Dead stands alone. Again, I'm gonna have to do a breakdown of that at some point just to detail why I love that game so much. But The Last of Us has a fantastic story, great cast, good acting, great music, some really hard themes. It doesn't pull its punches. You get hit with some emotional haymakers. I wouldn't say all the time or often, but they're used sparingly. Like they do a couple little jabs, but when they hit you, they hit you. They use them really well, very effectively. But when you set that aside and you look at the game itself, it's a very repetitive process. In each level, you are going somewhere, finding a weapon, gathering parts, taking out enemies, sneaking by some, dealing with a large puzzle that you might need to solve, and they're not overly complicated. You're going to a crafting bench, maybe you're gathering a few collectibles, you're having a few conversations, a couple cutscenes, end of that stage, move on to the next part. And it's like that throughout the entire game. From start to finish, there is nothing in the game where there's a moment where you go, whoa, that was so different from anything else I've done. I wasn't ready for that. That really doesn't happen. I mean, you've got the odd quick time event or where you got to mash a button to avoid something happening, but by and large, the game is very, very simple. There's not a whole lot of complexity going on there. But I would say that is to the game's benefit because, not to say they're trying to make the gameplay experience boring, but the focus of that entire journey is the characters, the world that they're living in, how they interact with it, two different histories, two different opposing points of view on life and what their place in it is in this world. Joel having the benefit of having lived in a world prior to all of this happening, Ellie growing up in the only world she's ever known, which is this dilapidated apocalyptic future that it doesn't look good for humanity. So in that way, I would say maybe it's intentional, maybe not, but the simplicity of the gameplay mechanics allows for the story and the characters to take over because the game itself isn't the focus. Strange as that sounds, because at the end of the day, it is a video game. You're in it for an experience. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean playing what you would consider fundamentally a good game. It means playing a playable game with a great story. And for a while, I always thought it had to be both or the game couldn't be good. But a long time ago, I refined that opinion to go, okay, you know what? There are some games I really enjoy that when you break them down into all their parts and you examine them critically, they're not the greatest. They're not even the best. But they're a fantastic experience because they make everything about them workable. They make everything about them fairly simple and easy to slip into, and they do one thing really, really well. For a lot of those games, it's the story that's done really, really well. I'm thinking of another one, and again, you may agree or disagree with some of my examples, but Dead Space is another series that I love quite a bit. It's one that I've followed all the way through, and if they keep pumping out sequels, I'll keep playing them. That's one of those series for me that I'm a diehard fan to the end. They're going to have to do something ridiculously bad to screw it up for me. And if you go through each of the games, it's pretty simple. I mean, they have some interesting mechanics when it comes to gravity or weather conditions. But by and large, the game is quite simple. You're going to one place, you need to get something to open a door, or you got to rewire something to get to the next part, wash, rinse, repeat, fight some new enemies, dismember them, figure out how to take them out, take care of the boss, move on. It's not all that complex. But it's the evolution of the characters. It's the story, the journey they're on, the terror they're experiencing. Will they make it out alive? Who won't make it out alive? What's the overall plot? Because even though there's the immediate situation that they're in, there is an overarching story going on behind the scenes that's building towards something more. There's conspiracies on Earth. There's this religious order that's got a tremendous amount of influence and power. There's an energy crisis. There's a possibly corrupt government conducting experiments to try to solve this problem, and in the process, they're dipping their toe into something they really don't understand. And there's kind of this age-old, let's say, doomsday prophecy that's playing out at the exact same time. And within the first game, this is all contained in the background within the scope of the immediate problem of the characters having to get off of a dead ship that's filled to brim with these zombified, mutated corpses of the former crew. How did this happen? What happened before they got here? Is there anyone else alive? Can we fix this? Can we get out of here alive? There's a lot of questions going on. And although the game is very wash, rinse, repeat, the story and the characters, that's what really drives you and makes you want to keep going and see what happens next. And I'm pretty sure, I had to think about this for a second, but I feel pretty confident in saying that for a lot of games that would be the case. There are some that do everything really, really well. Again, I would say Red Dead Redemption is you know what? Although I can't say for sure if it's my number one game, it's definitely my top example for the most complete. And I've already gone over that, so I won't go through it again. But for the sake of this discussion, to me, it is the most complete game I have ever played. Hopefully, I'll come across that again. And I'll reiterate, hopefully the sequel lives up to that standard and pushes the bar a little bit further. I mean, we see what they did with Grand Theft Auto 5. Gives me high hopes for Red Dead Redemption 2, but that is aside from the point. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say on this. If you got any sort of thoughts as to whether it has to be an even balance between every aspect that makes up the game for it to be a good game, or if you feel the same way that if it does one thing really, really well, that can make up for the lack of investment in other areas of the game. Not to say that the other areas of the game, like for example, let's say the gameplay is fantastic, but the story's kind of meh. That doesn't necessarily mean they didn't care about the story, but maybe they focused on making a great platforming game, and the story was just there to justify you playing it, and that's the only purpose it serves, or vice versa. how you feel about that, what kind of examples you have, and what kind of games you found that do the exact same thing. In either case, I think it's a very interesting thought process to go through where you examine the games that you've played, take a good hard look at them, even if they're ones that you love a lot. And there's nothing wrong with them by going through this kind of thought exercise, but look at it and kind of dissect to see, what is it about this game that you enjoy so much? Is it the actual gameplay itself, or is it the story and the characters, the world, the environment, the music? It could be that too. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. And as always, my name's Rye. You guys take care of yourselves.